The Cleveland Browns have officially reached peak dysfunction, and their best player is absolutely livid about it. Myles Garrett, the franchise cornerstone, the defensive beast who has carried this organization on his back for years, is watching in real time as the Browns front office turns what should be a straightforward coaching hire into an embarrassing academic circus that's becoming the laughingstock of the entire NFL. And folks, when I tell you this situation is spiraling out of control, I'm not exaggerating even a little bit. This is bad. This is really, really bad. Here's what you need to understand right up front. Myles Garrett has already demanded a trade from Cleveland once before. Let that sink in for a second. One of the most dominant defensive players in the entire league, a generational talent who could write his own ticket to any contending team in the NFL, has already looked at this organization and said, "Get me out of here." The Browns managed to convince him to stay, to buy into the vision, to believe that things would get better. And now he's sitting in coaching interviews, watching the front office ask grown men with decades of NFL experience to write multi-part essays and take personality tests like they're applying for an entry-level corporate job, and you can bet your ass he's regretting that decision to stay. The absolute insanity of this situation cannot be overstated. Myles Garrett, following in the footsteps of Josh Allen up in Buffalo, has been given the opportunity to sit in on interviews with potential head coaching candidates. On the surface, this seems like a smart move by the organization. Your best player, your franchise cornerstone, gets input on who's going to be leading the team. It shows respect for Garrett's opinion and gives him some ownership in the direction of the franchise. That's how it should work in a functional organization. But the Cleveland Browns are not a functional organization, and what Myles Garrett is witnessing in these interviews is apparently so mind-boggling, so embarrassing, so completely divorced from football reality that it might just push him out the door for good this time. Let me break down exactly what's happening behind closed doors in Cleveland, and I promise you, it's even worse than you think. According to multiple reports from NFL insiders, the Browns' interview process has become something out of a dystopian corporate nightmare. We're not just talking about standard questions about offensive philosophy or defensive schemes or how you manage a locker room. No. The Browns, under general manager Andrew Berry and owner Jimmy Haslam, with the heavy influence of analytics guru Paul DePodesta, have created an interview gauntlet that includes personality tests, written essays, questionnaires, and homework assignments that candidates have to complete between the first and second rounds of interviews. Read that again. Homework assignments for NFL head coaching candidates. Men who have been coaching football longer than some of these front office analytics people have been alive. Men who have won Super Bowls, developed Hall of Fame players, and built championship programs from scratch. And Cleveland is asking them to go home and do homework like they're in some kind of twisted graduate school program. Is it any wonder that Mike McDaniel, the successful head coach of the Miami Dolphins, took one look at this process and said, absolutely not? McDaniel did an initial Zoom interview with the Browns and then immediately pulled his name out of consideration for a second interview. At first, people around the league were confused about why a coach would turn down an opportunity like that. Now we know. The man looked at what Cleveland was asking of coaching candidates and decided he'd rather stay in Miami or pursue literally any other opportunity than subject himself to writing essays about why he wants to coach the Browns. And McDaniel isn't alone. Multiple qualified coaching candidates have withdrawn their names from consideration for this job. These are accomplished football minds who could genuinely help turn around this franchise, and they're running away from Cleveland faster than a receiver running away from a Myles Garrett sack. That should tell you everything you need to know about how this organization is perceived around the league right now. But here's where it gets personal for Myles Garrett. He's not just hearing about this nonsense secondhand. He's not reading about it on Twitter or getting the scoop from his agent. No, Myles Garrett is sitting in these interviews, watching this debacle unfold with his own two eyes. He's seeing what the front office is prioritizing. He's witnessing the kinds of questions they're asking and the hoops they're making people jump through. And he's realizing in real time that the organization he plays for cares more about data points and personality profiles than actually winning football games. Garrett has made it clear, along with cornerback Denzel Ward, that he wants Jim Schwartz to be the next head coach. Schwartz is the current defensive coordinator, a guy who has been in the building for years, a proven NFL coach who has been a head coach before and knows what it takes to run an organization. He's a football guy through and through, someone who speaks the language of players and understands the game at the highest level. From Garrett's perspective, this should be a no-brainer. But instead of just hiring the guy who makes the most sense, who has the respect of the locker room, and who could step in and start coaching immediately, Cleveland is out here making candidates write essays and contemplating hiring guys like Grant Udinski, who just turned 30 years old and is in his first year as an offensive coordinator. Think about that from Myles Garrett's perspective. You're one of the best defensive players in the world. You've given everything to this organization. You've stayed loyal even when you had every reason to leave. You're vouching for a coach who you believe in, who you want to play for. And the front office is basically telling you, thanks for your input, but we're going to make this decision based on who scores highest on our personality test and writes the best essay. How insulting is that? How disrespectful is that to a player of Myles Garrett's caliber? The details coming out about this interview process are absolutely staggering. According to Tom Pelissero, one of the most respected NFL insiders in the business, the Browns spend an extraordinary amount of time gathering data on their coaching candidates. They're a data-driven operation, which sounds good in theory until you realize that they've taken it to such an extreme that they've lost sight of what actually matters. The interview process is designed to favor what Pelissero described as very smart people who in a lot of cases just happen to be tall, thin guys who came from Ivy League schools. Let that marinate for a second. The Browns have a profile for what they think a head coach should look like, and apparently it involves being tall, thin, and having gone to an Ivy League school. Never mind that some of the best coaches in NFL history wouldn't fit that profile. Never mind that Bill Belichick went to Wesleyan, Pete Carroll went to Pacific, and Andy Reid went to BYU. Never mind that football intelligence and leadership ability can't be measured by what college you went to or how well you perform on a written test. Cleveland has decided that their analytics model knows better than decades of football history and tradition. Brian Baldinger, a former NFL player and current analyst, was asked about this essay writing requirement, and his response perfectly captures how absurd this whole thing is. He said he's never heard of anything like this in all his years around football. He doesn't understand what the purpose of writing essays would have to do with leading a football team, and he made a point that should be obvious to anyone with common sense. If a coaching candidate can't articulate their vision sitting in a room talking to you face to face, how is any essay going to change that? What is a written test going to tell you about someone's ability to lead 53 grown men that you can't learn from an actual conversation? The Browns media members are starting to pile on now too. The initial patience that Cleveland fans and media had for this coaching search is evaporating rapidly as more details emerge about how dysfunctional the process has become. One local media member pointed out that they understand the Browns wanting to do personality tests, as many jobs use those, but everything else seems really ridiculous. The questionnaires, the multi-part essays, the homework assignments between interview rounds, what are they trying to accomplish with all of this? And here's a question that should make Browns fans furious. Did they make Jim Schwartz do all of this? The man has been in the building for years. He's been coaching in the NFL since before some of these front office people were watching football. Did they seriously ask a nearly 60-year-old man with decades of coaching experience to fill out questionnaires and write essays to explain to 37-year-old Andrew Berry why he knows football? Because if they did, that's beyond disrespectful. That's organizational malpractice. The speculation now is that this whole elaborate testing regime comes from Paul DePodesta, who has been with the organization for 10 years and built out their massive analytics department. DePodesta came from the baseball world, where he was one of the pioneers of the Moneyball approach. And look, analytics have their place in sports. Nobody's arguing against using data to inform decisions. But football isn't baseball. Football is, as one analyst put it, such a human sport that analytics are inherently flawed when they're taken to extremes. In baseball, you can isolate individual matchups and performances in ways that produce meaningful data. A pitcher versus a batter is a relatively controlled scenario. But in football, there are so many variables, so many moving parts, so much that depends on human elements like leadership, communication, trust, and chemistry that you simply cannot reduce it to numbers on a spreadsheet. Did a defensive back really miss his coverage, or was he trying to cover for a teammate who missed theirs? Is a quarterback's completion percentage low because of poor throws, or because receivers are running the wrong routes, or because the offensive line can't give him time? Analytics can inform these questions, but they can't answer them definitively. And yet the Browns have built their entire organizational philosophy around this data-driven approach, and it's becoming increasingly clear that it's holding them back rather than propelling them forward. The fact that no other team in the NFL is copying Cleveland's interview process should tell you everything you need to know. The NFL is a copycat league. When something works, other teams rush to replicate it, but you don't see any other organizations making coaches write essays or complete homework assignments. You know why? Because it doesn't work. It hasn't worked in Cleveland, and it's not going to magically start working now. For Myles Garrett, this has to be incredibly frustrating to watch. He's a football player. He understands football. He knows what makes a good coach and what players need from their leader. And he's watching the front office completely ignore all of that in favor of personality tests and written assignments. It's like being in a meeting where you know the right answer, you're trying to tell people the right answer, and they're just completely ignoring you in favor of some computer model that keeps spitting out wrong information. The reports suggest that Garrett is growing increasingly frustrated with this entire process, and honestly, who can blame him? He's already been through one coaching change. He's already dealt with organizational dysfunction. He's already given this franchise the benefit of the doubt once when he could have demanded his way to a contender. And now he's watching them fumble another coaching hire in spectacular fashion, and there's nothing he can do about it except sit there and watch it happen. The real danger here is that if Cleveland screws this up, and it's looking increasingly likely that they will, Myles Garrett might decide he's had enough. He might look at this situation and decide that life is too short to waste his prime years playing for an organization that doesn't know what it's doing. And if that happens, if Myles Garrett requests another trade and this time doesn't back down, the Browns will have no one to blame but themselves. Think about what a disaster that would be for Cleveland. Myles Garrett is the kind of player you build a franchise around. He's a perennial Defensive Player of the Year candidate. He's a game wrecker who offensive coordinators have to scheme around every single week. He's young enough to be elite for several more years, and he's the kind of leader you want in your locker room. Losing him would set this franchise back years, maybe even a decade. And for what? So the front office can feel smart about their data-driven process. So they can hire a tall, thin guy from an Ivy League school who tested well on their personality assessment. The comparison to what Josh Allen is doing in Buffalo is particularly damning for Cleveland. Allen is also sitting in on coaching interviews for the Bills, but Buffalo's search has been handled completely differently. They've been efficient, professional, and focused on finding the right football coach for their organization. They haven't made candidates write essays or complete homework assignments. They've treated qualified coaching candidates like the professionals they are, conducted thorough but reasonable interviews, and moved quickly to find their guy. Meanwhile, Cleveland is still out here asking people to take personality tests like they're hiring for a middle management position at an insurance company. The embarrassment factor here cannot be overstated. Every day that goes by with Cleveland still searching for a coach, every new detail that emerges about their bizarre interview process, every candidate that withdraws from consideration, all of it adds up to make the Browns look increasingly dysfunctional and out of touch with how successful NFL organizations operate. And Myles Garrett is watching all of this. He's seeing his organization become a punchline around the league. He's hearing from other players, from agents, from coaches about how Cleveland is perceived. He's dealing with the reality that free agents might not want to sign there, that other stars might not want to get traded there because of the dysfunction he's witnessing firsthand. How long is he supposed to just accept that and keep his mouth shut? The worst part is that this was all so avoidable. There was a clear, obvious choice right in front of them in Jim Schwartz, a guy who knows the organization, who has the respect of the players, who has head coaching experience, and who could step in and start working immediately. But instead of making the smart, simple decision, Cleveland is overthinking it to a comical degree, and in the process, they're alienating their best player and making themselves look foolish to the entire football world. The timeline here is also becoming a problem. We're now weeks into this coaching search with no resolution in sight. Every day without a head coach is a day the organization falls further behind in preparing for next season. Free agency planning, draft preparation, staff building, all of that is on hold while Cleveland tries to figure out which candidate wrote the best essay. It's organizational malpractice, and Myles Garrett knows it. What happens if Cleveland ends up hiring Grant Udinsky or some other analytics darling who fits their profile but doesn't have the respect of the locker room? What happens if they bring in a first-time head coach who struggles to manage veteran players and doesn't know how to maximize the talent on the roster? Myles Garrett would be stuck playing for a coach he didn't want, in a system that might not work. For an organization that clearly values data over his input, how long do you think he'd tolerate that situation? The front office better wake up and realize what's at stake here. They're not just risking another failed coaching hire. They're risking losing the best player this franchise has had in decades. They're risking their credibility around the league. They're risking becoming such a dysfunctional destination that no quality coach or player will want anything to do with them. And all because they can't get out of their own way and just hire a damn football coach like a normal organization. Myles Garrett deserves better than this. He deserves an organization that respects his input, that operates with urgency and purpose, that prioritizes winning football games over satisfying their analytics department. He deserves a front office that can recognize the obvious right answer when it's staring them in the face instead of making everything 10 times more complicated than it needs to be. The Browns are at a crossroads right now. They can continue down this path, stick with their personality tests and essay requirements and data-driven nonsense, and risk losing Myles Garrett while becoming even more of a laughingstock around the league. Or they can wake up, realize their process is broken, and make a decision that actually makes football sense before it's too late. Based on everything we've seen so far, I'm not optimistic about which path they'll choose. The Browns are going to be the Browns, as people around the league keep saying. And that's not a compliment. That's a damning indictment of an organization that has consistently found ways to fail even when success seems within reach. For Myles Garrett, the message is clear. You were right the first time when you wanted out. This organization is not serious about winning. They're serious about process, about data, about feeling smarter than everyone else. But none of that translates to wins on Sunday. And if you want to win a championship before your career is over, you might need to do it somewhere else, because Cleveland clearly isn't capable of getting out of its own way long enough to build a winner. This situation is bad, folks, really bad, and it's only getting worse with each passing day. The question now is whether the Browns will figure it out before they lose the best thing they have going for them. Based on their track record, I wouldn't bet on it. Now it's your turn. Get down in the comments and let me know what you think about this absolute disaster. Should Myles Garrett demand another trade? Is Jim Schwartz the obvious choice, or are the Browns right to explore other options? And how much longer before this whole thing implodes completely? Drop your thoughts below and don't hold back. If you've made it this far, you know what to do. Smash that like button, hit subscribe if you haven't already, and turn on those notifications so you don't miss any updates on this developing story. Because trust me, with the way things are going in Cleveland, there's going to be plenty more chaos to cover. This is only going to get worse before it gets better, and I'll be here to break it all down for you every step of the way. Until next time, keep the vision, stay focused on what matters, and remember, sometimes the most talented players end up on the worst organizations, and it's not their fault. Myles Garrett is learning that lesson the hard way right now. Let's see if he decides to do something about it. Peace.